Hi, this tutorial is for 7th grade life science and it's about the respiratory system. To start with, respiratory system has a whole bunch of structures. Here's all the names of the anatomical parts, and its basic job is to get atmospheric gases such as oxygen down through the system all the way to the very end through these little tiny pipes to a part that looks like this, where oxygen molecules can actually cross over from the atmosphere into the bloodstream, and CO2 molecules can leave the bloodstream and go back into the air, so that when you exhale you get rid of waste products and you bring in products we need. Well, when we're breathing, the air we breathe is about 78% nitrogen and about 21% oxygen. So we're not breathing in 100% oxygen as it is. And then that other small part is made up of things such as argon, CO2, neon, helium, methane, and let's see, krypton, and then hydrogen, which I think that's methane. So we're breathing in some small other things, but mainly it's nitrogen and oxygen, and that's 21%. Here's all the parts in detail, and you can get into very detail as far as the parts. We're just going to go over the major parts today, and those are right here. So the pharynx is the first part where air really goes to. After it goes through the nose or the mouth, you can breathe through both, but ideally you should breathe through your nose because the hairs in your nose help clean the air, the mucus moistens it, and it warms the air. But then you get into the pharynx, which is right here, and that's where the mouth and the nose meet. Then it goes down to the epiglottis, and the epiglottis is where there's a branch. You can't see it in here, but one branch would go over to the digestive system, through the esophagus, and down to the stomach. And the epiglottis is a little flap of tissue that when you swallow, it flaps down over your respiratory system so that food can go through your mouth and into the digestive system. You don't want food going into your respiratory system. You can choke. And this is why when you're a little kid, your parents tell you to not talk while you're chewing food or while you're eating. Because if you talk, the air gets forced up through here, it opens the epiglottis. If you're chewing while you're talking, then there's a chance it could go down into your respiratory system instead of your digestive. Just below that is the larynx. Larynx is right down here. And the larynx has some folds of tissue on each side that are the vocal folds, or sometimes called the vocal cords. They're not individual strings, they're just folds of tissue on the sides that you can control, and when you exhale air, they move past that and create different pitches. Your trachea is right below it, and your trachea has these rings of cartilage. This drawing's a little inaccurate. It shows the trachea in this person's chest. Your trachea is actually right about here. You can feel it, and then it goes down into the chest. And then after the trachea, there's a right and left branch, and each one of those branches is called a bronchus. And each bronchus leads into a lung, and then inside the lung, those branches get smaller and smaller and smaller. Those are called bronchioles. And then the branches end at these little things called alveoli. And in this drawing, they're much bigger than in real life. The alveoli are surrounded by capillaries, and this is where oxygen, or O2, goes into your blood, and it's where CO2 leaves your blood and goes back into the atmosphere, so that when you exhale, it goes out. And then underneath everything is your diaphragm, which is a muscle that separates your chest cavity or thoracic cavity from your abdominal cavity. And the diaphragm, when it's relaxed, is usually right up about here, and when it contracts, it pulls down, and that helps you inhale. You also have intercostal muscles, which are in between your ribs, and they help, but your diaphragm does the main amount of work. Now, if someone is going through trauma or has a traumatic injury, they could be losing blood into their abdomen, they could be losing blood outside onto the ground, or they could have an injury to their lungs. Any type of shock is going to prevent the cells from either getting sugar and oxygen or just oxygen. And since we're normally breathing in only 21%, one common treatment you'll see in an ambulance or in an emergency room to help people that are going into shock is to put a mask on them and this delivers 100% oxygen. So that even if there is something wrong, if they're controlling bleeding or they've lost a lot of blood or other things, the amount of oxygen going into their respiratory system is way higher than it would be just from the atmosphere. That helps keep them alive, and it actually helps them heal. Now, every once in a while there's a problem where a person's respiratory system isn't working, and that's usually from a problem with the nervous system as well. And what you can do to help them there is use this thing called a bag valve mask. There's a little valve on it. Here's the mask, and that actually goes over a person's nose and mouth. It has a little one-way valve that allows air in, but not back out. It can't go this way. Air can only go out that way. So they exhale there. And then this bag, you squeeze it with your hand, and it pushes air into the patient's lungs. Now, if you're just using a bag valve mask, you'll get 21% oxygen because you're pulling in air from the outside room. But you can see there's this other plastic bag attached. That's an O2 reservoir. And there's this little tube over here that you can connect to oxygen. So then you could get rid of that 21% and change it to 100%. And if the person's not breathing, you can breathe for them, getting 100% until you deal with the other things that might be giving them some trouble. So once again, when you breathe in, air goes through the pharynx, past the epiglottis, through the larynx, through the trachea, goes down the right or left bronchus, through smaller tubes called bronchioles until it gets to the alveoli. And that's where gas exchange takes place. CO2 goes from the blood back into the air, and O2 that's in the air goes into your blood. Then you exhale, and the CO2 goes back up through the bronchioles, through the bronchus, through the trachea, through the larynx. It might make a sound or even say a word while you're doing this. Past the epiglottis, up the pharynx, and out into the atmosphere.